Hi, my name is Jim Daly. I lecture paper F5 for ACCA, and on the last exam sitting I had the top 3 students in Ireland, which also equated to 1st, 6th and 9th in the world. I've been asked, we'll say by Griffith College, just to give an idea as to what F5 is about and to take just an aspect of the syllabus for a few minutes just to work through it, just to give people a flavour for what we do in Griffith College. The syllabus for F5 comes in 5 sections, sections A to E inclusive. Section A of the syllabus is what we refer to as specialist cost and management accounting techniques. And in particular, part A of that syllabus section is on activity-based costing. Syllabus tells us that for the activity-based costing, we need to be able to compare it against the traditional method known to us as absorption costing. It's examined quite often, by ACCA at this level, and as a result, we'll take an example of a past question and work through it, just to give a feel for what it's about. The question I'm looking at is a question called Gadget Company. It featured on the December 2010 paper. It was question 4 and it was worth 20 marks to us when asked. All questions on F5 are worth equal marks, all worth 20. The question itself is asking us in part A to calculate the full cost per unit for products A, B and C under traditional absorption costing, using direct labour hours as the basis for apportionment. Second part of the question, B, for 9 marks, is asking us to calculate the full cost per unit of each product using activity-based. So it's using the traditional method absorption costing and it's using the newer method activity-based costing and asking us to compare and contrast. When you look at the question, you can see just the second part of it. The price for raw materials remained constant throughout the year at €1.20 per kg. Similarly, the direct labour cost for the whole workforce was €14.80 per hour. The annual overhead costs were as follows, and the annual overhead costs comprised machine setups 26,550, machine running costs 66,400, procurement costs 48,000, and delivery costs 54,320. So when we look, we'll say, at those overheads separately, it is important to remember that all activity-based costing and absorption costing do is deal with overheads. They don't impact, we'll say, on the materials, they don't impact on the labour. We have 15 minutes to read this paper before we start. We're not allowed to write on our exam scripts, but we can write on the exam papers. So what I would be doing is adding my overheads straight off, and in doing so, they total €195,270. So there's our total overheads. That was not done in the question for me. The 4 overhead costs were mentioned directly, but the overheads were not added up, giving us the total of 195,270. In looking at that 195,270, that is what absorption costing requires or needs. For the absorption costing, we need the total 195,270. Whereas for the activity-based costing, we need the breakdown. And the breakdown, is given to us in 4 stages for the activity-based. In doing that, the question is now asking us to calculate the full cost per unit of product. Bearing in mind, we're asked to do it using absorption costing initially. In doing that, and always important to remember that the cost of any item of product comprises 3 items. And so if I take each of my 3, product A, product B, and product C, first item of cost to us will be, and always will be, materials. And my materials cost, according to the question, we're told we expect to pay €1.20 per kg. And I am told the direct material usage in kgs per unit is in a 2 for the A. So 2 kgs at 120 gives me a materials price of 240. 3 kgs for material B at 120 gives me a materials cost of 360. And 4 kgs, we'll say, to produce 1 unit of product C after 120 gives me a materials cost of €4.80. There is the materials cost. The labour cost is the next element, and for my labour we're told we expect to pay labour at €14.80 per hour. Problem is, it doesn't take me an hour to produce an A, all it does take me is 0.1 hours. So 0.1 multiplied by 14.80 gives me a labour cost of 148. 1480 multiplied by 0.15 labour hours for product B gives me a labour cost of 222. And I have 0.2 labour hours to produce 1 unit of C at the 1480, give me a labour cost of €2.96. So no difficulty with the materials, no difficulty with the labour. Not what I expected there to be, because the question is on absorption costing. Absorption costing is about overheads and overheads exclusively. When we looked at the beginning of the question, we said that the total overheads, as detailed, added to 195,270. So in taking that 195,270 now, the problem is how much of that expected or budgeted overheads can we charge to 1 unit of product? They're in at 195,270. How much of the 195,270 can we attribute to 1 unit of A, 1 unit of B, or 1 unit of C? We don't know. So what we use is a costing system known to us as absorption costing. Absorption costing would simply say estimate the overheads, 195,270. In estimating the overheads, what is the basis that the company want to use in charging those overheads? So the budgeted or estimated basis, according to part A in the question, was using direct labour hours as the basis of apportionment. So in using direct labour hours as the basis of apportionment, we plan to make 15,000 units of product A. I plan to make 12,000 units of product B, and I plan to make a total of 18,000 units of product C. Each of those units are expected to take, as mentioned previously, 0.1 hours from labour point of view, 0.15 hours from a labour perspective, and again for product C, each expected to take 0.2 hours. In adding or in multiplying first off, I get 1,500 hours, 1,800 labour hours, and 0.2 by the 18,000 gives me 3,600 labour hours. Adding those three, that is 6,900 labour hours. And that's the basis that we were asked to use when it comes to apportioning the overhead. So my budgeted overheads are 195,270. The basis we're using to apportion is labour hours. There are now 6,900 labour hours expected to be worked in the accounting period. Therefore, we will charge overheads at a rate now of €28.30 per labour hour. So again, for absorption costing, we need to find two bits of information. What are the expected overheads and what is the expected basis? In this case, it was labour hours. We were told that in part A of the question. It could easily have been machine hours, or it could have been the number of units as well. And they're the only three bases that are mentioned on syllabus. So in getting the cost per unit now, my overheads are now being charged at €28.30 per labour hour, but only takes 0.1 hours to manufacture an A. So that's an overhead charge of €2.83. It takes me 0.15 hours to manufacture or produce a B, so that's in at €4.25. That's a cost of €4.25. And for the C, €28.30 at 0.2 hours, that's an overhead charge of €5.66. In doing that, okay, we can now get the cost per unit using absorption costing, and the cost per unit is in at 671, is in at 1007, and for product C is in at a cost of 1342. And for 5 marks, that's what we were asked to do. So for absorption costing, the trick is very simply identify the overheads, identify the basis, get the rate and charge to the unit of product. 5 straightforward marks, asked quite frequently, we'll say on the paper F5 level. In switching from absorption costing, okay, to activity-based costing, the materials and the labour will remain unaffected because, again, activity-based costing has very little to be doing with overheads. Activity-based costing has very little to be doing with the materials or the labour. It's overhead focused predominantly. So for each of my 3 products again, product A, product B, and product C, I have materials, no change in my materials cost, and my materials, as we had in part A, €2.40 are in at €3.60 and are in at €4.80. And that is my materials cost, we'll say, as it was for the absorption previously as well. No change. Activity-based costing does not affect the materials. Labour, no change in my labour cost from part A of the question as well. We're now looking at part B under activity-based costing. Labour will remain at €1.48, okay, €1.48, €2.22, and at €2.96. And there is my labour cost. Third element of cost are my overheads. And there will be a change in my overheads because we're now changing the system from the traditional system known as absorption to the more modern method known as activity-based costing. So that begs the question, in implementing an activity-based costing system or in bringing it into play, what needs to be found in any exam question or in trying to describe, we'll say, the implementation of an ABC, what do we need to do? The first thing we need to do is to be able to identify what are referred to as our key activities. Okay, identify our key activities, also known as my cost pools. That's the first thing. Second thing we need to do is again identify, and in this instance identify what is referred to as our cost drivers. The rest of it is just the sums, dividing one into the other basically. Step 3 is to calculate the cost, okay, calculate the cost per activity. And lastly, step 4, charge to a unit of product or service. Okay, in this case, product. There are 3 products, A, B, and C. So for the implementation of an activity-based costing system, that's what we need to do. At the very outset of this question, we were told for absorption costing that the total overheads were in at €195,270. And that's what we needed for absorption costing. On the other hand, for activity-based costing, we needed to identify the activities. 1, 2, 3, 4 activities identified in the question. Machine setups, machine running costs, procurement costs, and delivery costs. So we have identified the activities from the question. Now that we have identified the activities, what we now need to identify are the cost drivers, i.e. step 2 when it comes to the implementation of an activity-based costing system. And by cost drivers, what we mean is what do we see as being the best or the fairest way for sharing the overheads out. In doing that, okay, we can change the method just slightly to suit the needs for the activity-based costing little method or system. Activity 1, according to our question, was cost relating to setups. Okay, costs relating to setups. And my setup costs, we are attributing out of the total 195,270, we are attributing a total of 26,550. There's the overhead we're attributing to that activity. For activity-based costing, now identify the driver. What might we see as being the fairest or best way for sharing that overhead out amongst my products? Question gives me choices. It mentions direct labour hours per unit. It mentions machine hours per unit. Production runs are also mentioned per annum, as are purchase orders per annum, as are the number of deliveries, we'll say, per annum. And for setups, we set up machinery to run production. So the obvious cost driver to use here is the number of production runs. There are, according to the question, 16 runs for product A, 12 for product B, and 8 for product C. And that's a total of 36 production runs. So 26,550 divided by 36 production runs gives me a cost of $737.50 per production run. So that's the rate at which we're going to charge that overhead for that particular activity. So each unit of product is now going to get its fair share of the overhead in a while when we distribute the overheads. Activity number 2, according to our question, is machine running costs. And for machine running costs, we are attributing overhead, budgeted or estimated overhead of €66,400 to this activity. Looking at the question, what might you see as being the best or fairest way for sharing that out, i.e. identify the most appropriate cost driver, and the one we might use in this case might be the number of machine hours. Now you could use, we'd say, the number of production runs as well if you wanted to. It's not that you would be wrong, it's that you might just maybe lose half a mark for not using the more correct one, but it would not be wrong. In this case, we're using machine hours. For each of my 3 products, okay, product A, product B, and product C, we're looking at total number of hours of 15,000 units of product A, 12,000 units for product B, and 18,000 units for product C. Each of those are expected to use 0.5 machine hours, 0.7 machine hours, and 0.9 machine hours. In multiplying, that gives me 7,000 500 gives me 8,400 and gives me 16,200. So the total number of machine hours expected to be used in the next accounting period is 32,100 machine hours. And they're the number of machine hours that we anticipate utilizing in the next accounting period. So the total expected overhead for this activity is 66,400. We've identified machine hours as the more appropriate cost driver. So the number of machine hours divided into my overhead gives me a rate of roughly €2.07 per machine hour. And it's on that basis that we'll charge that overhead to each unit of product. So €2.07. Activity number 3, identified in our question, are procurement costs. And by procurement, we mean buying in costs, basically, or predominantly. So procurement costs, and we are attributing estimated or budgeted overhead, in this case, of €48,000. Okay, €48,000. The most appropriate cost driver to use for the procurement costs will be the number of purchase orders, an obvious type one, and there are 94 purchase orders expected in the next accounting period. The 94 is 24 for A, 28 for B, and 42 purchase orders for C. So that gives me a rate of €510, 510 we'll say 664 per purchase order. So for every purchase order, that's what we're going charging in overhead, 510.64. The last activity identified in the question is the one pertaining to delivery costs. And the delivery costs, straightforward enough one here, budgeted or estimated overhead from the question is in at 54,320. Okay, 54,320. And the most appropriate driver to use for delivery costs is the number of deliveries. When we add them up for each of the 3 products, there is 140 deliveries expected. So that's giving me a rate of €388 per delivery. And it's on that basis that we can now charge the overheads out amongst our products at a rate of €388 per delivery. So again, with regards to the activity-based costing, the trick to the activity-based costing is we need to identify the amount of activities, and we need to identify what we see as being the most appropriate cost drivers. And by cost drivers, what we mean is what we see as being the best and fairest way for sharing the overheads out. In this case, we've identified 4 activities. We need 4 cost drivers. And that's what we've just done, and we've calculated a rate at which each of those could be charged to the unit of product. From that then, we can now, we say, distribute the overheads across my products in total. And in distributing the overheads, we just need to pick up on 1 or 2 smaller things that need to be done first off for each of product A, product B, and product C. Activity number 1 was the machine setup costs, okay, machine setups. We said we would be charging machine setups at a rate of €737.50 per production run. There are 36 production runs all told, for which 16 of them relate to product A. Therefore, 737.50 multiplied by 16 gives me an overhead allocation of 11,800. 737.50 multiplied by 12 production runs for product B gives me 8,850, or in around. And for product C, I have 737.50 by 8 production runs, and that's in at 5,900. And if you want, just to keep an eye on the total overhead that we're allocating is 26,550. That's all, 26,550. So all we're doing is just sharing out the overhead, as mentioned in the question, equally or fairly across my 3 products, using the cost drivers identified. Activity number 2 is the machine running costs. Okay, the machine running costs. And for the machine running, we said we would charge these at a rate of €2.07 per machine hour. There are 32,100 machine hours expected to be used, and of the 32,100, 7,500 relate to product A, 8,400 to product B, and 16,200 to product C. So again, in sharing that out, I get costs of approximately 15,514, depending on how you round it, 17,375, depending on how we round it, and again 33,510. And in adding those up, they should be adding back to the total, or close enough to it, up 66,400. Might be a slight difference due to rounding, nothing other than that. Okay, all we're doing is just a little self-check just to make sure. No need for the total column if we don't want to show it. Procurement costs. And from my procurement costs, we said we would charge these at a rate of, for the procurement, 510.64 per purchase order. There were a total of 94 purchase orders, for which 24 relate to product A. So 24 by the 510.64 gives me an allocation of roughly 12,255. 12,255 to product B, 14,298, and to product C, 21,447. Adding those three, that's in at 48,000, or close enough to it as well. Might be a slight difference due to rounding. Outside of the procurement, the last one we had was delivery. And for my delivery costs, we said we were charging these at a rate of €388 per delivery. There are 48 deliveries for product A, that's 18,264. There are 30 deliveries for product B at $388 per delivery. That's an allocation of 11,640. There are 62 deliveries for product C, and that's a further allocation of 24,056. Adding those up, that should be adding back to, or close enough to, 54,320. So there's my overheads, okay, and just my overheads distributed, okay, my overheads distribution. The materials and the labour we have no difficulty with. This is just overheads and overheads predominantly. So when I look at the distribution of overheads, the important thing to remember, my total overheads do not change. 195,270. Now a slight difference maybe due to rounding, that doesn't put us up or down in any shape or form. Of that, we are now saying 58,193 of those overheads relate to product A. We plan on making 15,000 units of product A. Therefore, that's an overhead charge of $388, we'll say, per unit. So there's the overheads I'm going to be charging to a unit of product. Product B, when I add those up, 52,163 divided by the number of units for which we plan to make 12,000, and that's an estimated unit cost in overheads of €4.35. Okay, €4.35 per unit. For product C, I add up and I get 84,913. Expected for 18,000 units of product C, and that divided into the 84 gives me €4.72 per unit. So again, activity-based costing, all we're doing is sharing out the overheads on a fairer or more equitable basis. Each unit of product is getting its fair share of the overheads depending on its usage of cost driver as mentioned in the question. So when we bring that back to play, we now need to add the overheads to my unit costs, and the overheads are now in at $388 per unit, are now in at $4.35 per unit, and are now in at $4.72 per unit of product. So when we add those, we'll say collectively, that gives me a new cost per unit, and the cost per unit of product A is now in at $7.76, is now in at $10.17, and is now in at $12.48. When we looked at that question previously under the absorption costing, the cost of product A was in at $6.71. Under activity-based costing, it's in at $7.76. The cost per unit have changed as a result of us changing the system for dealing with overheads. Absorption costing simply accepts the overheads, i.e. the 195,217, whereas the activity-based costing doesn't just accept them. Activity-based costing needs the overheads broken down into its key or core activities, and we need to identify cost drivers from the question involved. For being able to do those two parts of the question, or knowing what to do, you were looking at, we'll say 14 marks, we'll say straight off. 5 for part A, 9 for part B. And part C was just a discussion, and the discussion asked us, using your calculations from A and B, explain how activity-based costing may help the gadget to improve the profitability of each product. And the question did give us selling prices. It focused attention on the cost. We get more accurate product costings. As a consequence, that's because the overheads are distributed on a more equitable basis. That leads to more accurate product profitability forecasts. We've identified cost drivers, and we've identified, we'll say, activities. That's why activity-based costing gives us, we'll say, the more accurate cost per unit. That type of question is very, very typical, we'll say, on an F5 paper. It comes from section A of our syllabus, whereby we're asked, we'll say, to be able to calculate the cost per unit using absorption, which we did, and then to be able to redo it, calculating the cost under activity-based costing, which is what we've just done there. A small little comparison between both, and you could be looking at 20 marks from an exam perspective. It's just a matter of knowing what it's about. F5 is a further, as a paper, is just a further build-up from F2. And it's assumed that you have certain knowledge coming forward from F2. We don't assume it, we have to make sure that we do. So in starting these areas at the F5 level, we have to revisit F2 just to make sure that the thought process are right before we can build on them. On the F2 paper, marginal costing and absorption costing feature predominantly and very heavily. F5 steps it up into the new modern manufacturing, we say, specialist cost and management accounting techniques. The very first one of those is activity-based costing. There is nothing at all wrong with an activity-based costing question. We know what format the question will take when it'll be asked. It'll be measured against the conventional system known as absorption and a small little comparison. And that exam question, guys, is very, very typical of a question at F5 level. It also follows on to, we'll say, the likes of throughput accounting, which is challenging marginal costing, life cycle costing, target costing, and environmental management accounting as well. And that would be, we say, those 5 areas would be section A of our syllabus, a question, we'll say, on an exam paper from one of those 5 areas. So again, on F5, it is a very doable, it is a very gettable paper. The marks that can be gotten are quite high. And as we said, with regards to the students, we'll say that performed the last exam sitting, the top 3 in Ireland were students of mine, of which one was first in the world. In looking there and dealing with F5, I would hope to see you looking into the future. And with regards to any questions or anything like that, you could email Griffith College as well, just from that point of view. Thank you for your time, and I hope I've been of some help and assistance to you. Thank you very much for that. Thank you.